Having spent the last 16 years of my life abroad, I can say that's given me a particular perspective on things, and the last 8 consecutively have been spent in Europe, which has nuanced that perspective. I'm Rafael Di Furia, this is Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. Something I'm often surprised by when I'm speaking with my friends back in the US, or those who are maybe a little bit more recently off the boat, so to speak, is the level of consumerism. I have mentioned this in previous episodes where I've talked about my perspective after X amount of time abroad, but this particularly is something that really shocks me, and it's not just the amount of stuff that's collected, meaningless things that are completely unnecessary, but also the amount of space that people have in the US to be able to not just store these things, but showcase these things in their home, collecting all kinds of knickknacks and whatever. Fine, I've got my own little collections of things, but I mean, I'm not saying that I'm devoting a whole wall of space to this one particular hobby of mine or this one particular TV show that I've loved since I was a child. And don't get me wrong here, I'm not necessarily saying it's inherently a bad thing. It's just something that strikes me as kind of different after having been away for so long. A cultural difference, I guess you could call it. And actually, having been abroad for this long, there are a lot of different little cultural things that have kind of popped up in the last 16 plus years that maybe things are done a little bit differently now, or things are maybe presented in a different way on TV, or the lexicon of kind of the words in use also seems to have shifted at some point as well. But even though I'm not going to say the political landscape is perfect across Europe, and of course it's going to depend from country to country, but generalizing here and painting with a very broad brushstroke, it is really, really shocking for me to see how divided Americans have become over the years. I've mentioned this again in previous episodes, but it feels as though every year the divide just keeps growing wider and wider, whether we're talking about politics, health, religion, personal views on things, and the lack of ability and or willingness to be able to see the other person's perspective or make an attempt to see it and agree to disagree. That is one particular cultural aspect of the US that has become like just mind-boggling to me and completely just shocks me as somebody living outside of the States. And that wouldn't even come close to the peak of the mountain as to what I would find shocking about what's changed since I've left or how I see things since I've left. Like, for example, cities that I maybe had gone to when I was a kid or that we lived in or whatever, like, for example, San Francisco or Venice, California, or even Portland or Seattle. I mean, to me, to see videos from these places now with the level of homelessness, drug consumption, and how some of these places are turning into almost literal zombie lands with people roaming about without any way of kind of pushing their lives forward, or maybe in some cases being very happy with keeping their lives like that. It has been a huge shock to me, as well as to see the crime rates and statistics changing over the years. I mean, certain news that I would say that I would be used to maybe reading from a newspaper from Rio de Janeiro, I've been seeing coming out of the news in San Francisco in the last few years. And of course, the cost of living that comes along with that. I mean, the cost of even a dozen eggs or cream, like heavy whipping cream, or a bottle of milk. Actually, the bottle of milk thing could differ a little bit just because you can buy a gallon of it in the US. Here you buy like a small carton usually. But even when I hear about the cost of a cocktail in places like New York City from my friends who have lived there or are living there, or even the cost of a slice of pizza, I find it horrifying, not to mention all of the additives and chemicals that have been added, as well as even now that there are labels that are being put on products that say if something has an ingredient that's been genetically modified. That's something that truly boggles my mind, especially when we're even looking at countries like Italy, where lab-grown meat has actually been banned. I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I'd like food to be from nature, not from a lab. Maybe that's just me. And maybe that is the wrong viewpoint to have in this day and age. But I think I'm willing to take that risk. There's another cultural aspect that always shocks me every time that I encounter this, especially having lived in Southern Europe as well as the Middle East, and that is political correctness and the way that people speak around subjects, especially to me, it seems as though people from the West Coast, how much there is this just lack of ability to be direct about a particular topic. Or maybe not lack of ability, but potentially lack of willingness. And just before we get into this next section, I do want to say a huge thank you to those of you who help to make these episodes possible on a monthly basis through RafaelDiFuria.com/Patreon or Patreon.com/RafaelDiFuria, as well as the one-time support through RafaelDiFuria.com/support, as well as the thanks button, the super thanks button here on YouTube, as well as I want to say thank you to those of you who participate in the conversation, this open conversation, and share your thoughts down below in the comments section here on YouTube. And of course, with all of this said, again, thank you so very, very much, and let's get back into the rest of the episode. But another thing to me when looking at the US is the cost of travel over there. How much it costs to jump on a plane or hotels or whatever it may be that would actually be involved with going to experience another location. It's mind-boggling. I mean, you can still get pretty cheap flights out here. They're not as cheap as they used to be, but if you do keep your eyes open, you can still get 30 or 40 euro international flights. They exist, especially if you're traveling with just carry-on, like a small backpack or something. How many hours that people spend in their cars is shocking to me, especially that there was a measured statistic about how many people eat in their cars, how many meals they eat in their cars weekly. To me, that's absolutely bonkers. And the amount of hours that people even spend driving across a city or to get from their job to their house and their house to their job, it's really surprising to me. Granted, does that exist here? It definitely exists here. I mean, I know people who will go from Braga to Porto or Porto to Braga to go for their commute every day, but even that, it's not going to be like 3 hours to cross your city or an hour and a half to cross the city itself. It's like you get to the city and then, okay, you hit a little bit of traffic and then you eventually get to where you're going. And even if we're talking about distances and the time that it would take to get from one place to another, the lack of cultural differences that you see in the US versus in Europe, again, it's shocking to me because in the matter of what you would take to drive from Los Angeles to San Francisco, forget even San Francisco to Seattle, you would see potentially 3 or 4 different countries with maybe between 3 and 5 different cultural groups and that many, if not more, languages that are spoken between these people. To be a single language speaker in Europe is not that it's uncommon, but it's sometimes looked down upon by certain types of people. And to speak maybe at least 2 languages is not uncommon, or to speak your language and at least be able to understand the neighboring language from the neighboring country, it's not uncommon at all. So it's always funny to me when Americans or people from the UK will be traveling abroad, native English speakers, and they go to a place and they say, hey, I came here and nobody speaks English, and what's happening here? I expect to be spoken to in English. And that always strikes me as hilarious because even though English is an internationally used and spoken language, you wouldn't expect that, say, if somebody who comes from Germany traveling to California is going to have everybody speak to them in German. Or maybe if someone is going from, say, Spain to, I don't know, Florida, and they expect that everyone should speak to them in Spanish. Although at that point, there might not actually be the best example of what I'm trying to get across here, but I think you might get the point that I'm going for here. But it's very common, especially in school, for younger people to be exposed to at least one more language. Often it could be English, or it could be that it's the bordering language. Like, for example, I have a lot of friends that speak 4 or 5 languages. Maybe they don't speak all of them perfectly, or even for those who actually do speak them all perfectly, they won't just speak them perfectly, but they'll actually have certifications in those languages. Like, even for me, I'm only fluent in 1 language, English, but I can get around in a total of 6 languages, but I still sometimes feel like, oh, poor little me that I don't speak as well as some of my friends who are completely fluent in their 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th languages. But like I was mentioning before, one of the big things over the last years that I've seen that's been surprising to me is the safety and security of people in the US. But it's not just from like physical safety and well-being, but taking it more into that direction of well-being, the way that I grew up versus the way that I've been able to live over the last years, and having access to either affordable or no-cost healthcare or low-cost healthcare, or that I'm paying way too much in Social Security and taxes. Because even though low-cost healthcare is a thing, low-cost healthcare comes at a cost, if that makes any sense. And depending on where you are, you may be required to pay for healthcare monthly, separate from any type of governmental kind of program. Or there are going to be other countries where your social security will cover it, and then a small kind of like copay on top of that. Or if it's a grave enough of a situation, then nothing at all. And I've talked about this many times, but I've had friends who've complained about just having a tummy ache and have gone to the emergency room, and it was nothing really all that big of a deal to even worry about to begin with. And so even having grown up with, it's like, wait, are you really sick? Are you actually sick? Are you like about to like kick the bucket before you even think about whether going to the emergency room is worthwhile? That can get very expensive very quickly. But it is also a shock to me at the same time to see where some of the tax dollars are spent, as well as social security money is spent, instead of being able to be put into programs like this, because theoretically, at least from everything that I've seen, the US should be able to have something like what exists in Europe. But we'll just say that's a different topic for a different day, and maybe a whole different YouTube channel that might not even be mine. But something on a completely different note, something that I got reminded of recently while watching an American TV show was the rental process in America, that you can go and there's a contract ready for you just to sign on the spot. No negotiation. It's just you take it or you leave it. I've had multiple experiences in Europe where it's necessary to go back and forth, sometimes even for weeks at a time, to make sure that everything is ironed out properly and that everybody agrees to everything. There have even been a couple times where I've either had a landlord or an agent send me an agreement saying, hey, this is just a template that we got off the internet. If there's anything you want changed in here, just like, let me know. Then we go back and forth to make sure everything works. And no, we want it like this. And yeah, we want it like that. Blah, 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 blah. It was shocking to me how fast. And then not only just signing the contract, but being able to move in so soon after, and for such short term periods. That blows my mind how short the long-term leases are in America. I mean, forget a long-term lease of 1 year is like 2 years. In Europe, sometimes even that's considered to be like normal term or short term. Another thing, though, that I don't know if I've actually talked too much about on this YouTube channel is about how sweet American desserts are, and just things that aren't even supposed to be sweet. Snacks that I've been able to kind of get my hands on over the years, or candies, or heaven forbid, soda. I've had a few opportunities to taste things over the year, and maybe like a Butterfinger would maybe be like the one thing that still isn't too sweet for me, but that's borderline. But there have been so many things that I've tried over the years that I just simply can't eat. Granted, I have been abroad for 16 years, and your palate can change over that amount of time anyway, and I've been in different places, but how sweet things are. Even for me here in Portugal, sometimes things are almost a little too sweet, almost to like an American level of sweet. But or even there have been some American friends that I've had over the years, maybe making a cake or something, and just like, it's delicious. It's just the flavor of the overly sugariness becomes so intense that even me, somebody who has a sweet tooth the size of Texas, can struggle with. But on the topic of food, though, there is something actually I've been really surprised to see over the years, and that is the number of European brands that I don't remember seeing as a kid in the US. Like, for example, Aldi. I never saw that in America growing up. And then now I hear about my friends, oh yeah, we're just going to pop down to Aldi to go get our groceries. And it's like, wait, you have one of those? Which one? Is it the Northern German or the Southern German one? Then at that point, just a blank stare comes across, and it's like, okay, forget that. You have Aldi? Who cares if it's the Northern one or the Southern one? Or even I remember a few years back, I knew someone who was going to the supermarket, and they said, yeah, I decided to pick up some Magnum ice cream. And I was like, wait, hold on. Show me the box. Because I never, ever remember seeing Magnum ice cream when I was growing up. Now you guys have it, apparently. I don't know if you still have it, but it was a thing at one point. But I will say that there is one very cute thing that I see here across Europe, not everywhere, but more often than I would have expected to have seen it in the US. And that is not just going out for a stroll, just walking down the street, but that is the amount of old couples, cute little old couples walking hand in hand. Forget even in the States, like going out for a stroll downtown, you might not even have like a pedestrian area to be able to properly walk down, maybe a main street with some sidewalks, but not like a pleasant walk to go strolling through the town. But for the final topic of this episode, bidets. I don't know how people live without them. And that is all I'm going to say on that topic. Anyway, I'm Rafael Di Furia. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Of course, thank you to those of you who helped to make these episodes possible. For those of you who are interested in participating, feel free to check out the links in the more info section below this episode on YouTube. Also, a huge thank you to those of you who take part in the conversation because, of course, as always, these conversations are open, and feel free to leave any of your thoughts down in the comment section below here on YouTube. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I will see you all next time. Later.